Hey everybody, before we get started with questions and answers, I got a couple of things to put out to y'all. The first of which is making a couple of changes again. I've looked kind of around at the channel, and now that we've been doing this for a while, I've got a really good feel for what's going on now. And time-lapse Thursday, it's going away. We're getting rid of it. It was the only feature I did that I had people that are like, yeah, I don't like this, it's boring, yada yada yada. And I had a couple of those videos that didn't even break 1,000 views in their first week, so I figure if I can't get 1,000 views on a video, not worth the time to put it together. And hopefully I'd like to get a lot more than that, so we're going to try and do something different on Thursdays now. We're going to do Politics Thursday, and so I'm going to make a video every week about things going on in politics. I may just choose one topic, I may choose several things and go through them in a list. We'll see how that works out. I don't exactly have the details on that figured out. It's going to be something new, and so there's going to be a bit of a learning curve there. That's what we've got going on there. Fridays is still Anything Goes Fridays. It's going to be whatever I feel like making a video about. Monday through Wednesday will still be the same. Machinery Monday, Talk About It Tuesday, and then Wednesday will be the Q&A as usual. So let's get to the questions. Wheels 4-Dimensional Pitch asks, awesome videos, keep up the good work. Thank you. And I was wondering, could you do an overview of the dashboard gauge cluster to explain the switches and gauges and what you wouldn't find in a normal vehicle? You got it. Alright, up here on the dash, this is some of the control switches we've got. This is marker lights here, headlights, so when I pass someone and I flash them over, this is the switch I use right here. This is headlights. More marker lights, more marker lights. These are the ones up on the breathers. If I had lights down the side of the sleeper, that's what would go on this one here. This is for fog lights that are not installed. This switch here, this is my beacons. It just says spare on it right now, but it's the beacons. This is for the air dump valve. This is the Jake brake right here. You got 3 different settings on that. You can have 1 head, 2 heads, or 3 heads all the way up, on off. And then this here is the cruise control. How the cruise control works is you have your on-off switch here, and then you have your set and your resume. And you can actually speed the truck up and slow it down by moving this switch up and down. This light here is for the wet kit, which is this switch right here. And this turns the PTO on, and when I turn the PTO on, this light comes on, and it's super bright, so it's annoying, so you won't drive down the road with it on and burn up the PTO. This is the 5th wheel slide release. This is the air suspension deflate switch. This is the passenger side moto mirror over here. This is the mirror heat right here, and then which doesn't work right now because neither of the mirrors work with it. And then these are just 2 spare switches that I don't have hooked up to anything right now. And then obviously over here you have the interaxle differential lock. For those of you that aren't truck drivers, this is just a single locker on this truck, and all this does is it locks the differential between the 2 axles. It is not a differential locker. And then over here for gauges, what we have here is in this stack, this is just your air pressure. You've got a red and a green in there. That's your front and rear system. This is your brake application pressure, fuel level, blank. That's a clock there, which is going to get replaced with a thermometer or an air scale eventually. I think I'm going to put an air scale here. And then this is a just an air pressure gauge for the bags. And that gauge right there will get replaced with the air scale as well. This is the transmission temperature. This one here, this is your forward rear axle temperature, rear axle temperature, and then this is your fuel filter gauge. And what that gauge does is you see it's reading down here around 0 right now. That's where you want it to read. If that gauge starts to read up here, you've got a clogged fuel filter. In the center of the dash here, you've got the tachometer, you got the speedometer, the odometer's broke, and then above that you have the pyrometer, and the little bulb you see sticking out there, that's actually the passenger side turn signal. I just don't have a cover for it. It broke off of there. Then over here what you got a voltmeter, turbo boost gauge, and then you have the air filter gauge that works the same way as the fuel gauge. If your pressure on that gets too high, you got clogged filters. And then you've got a water temperature, oil pressure, and then your amp meter. And then down below that here, you've got the ignition switch over here. You got your dome light, and this also turns the lights on the floor on at that same switch. You got the switch for the lights on the back of my sleeper, and you got the engine fan. And then up here you've got my CD player and the CB radio. I really like this CB radio. This is that new United Bearcat 980 SSB, and it works extremely well. I really like this radio. And then over here, this is the indicator panel, and then you can also see the mic for my hands-free Bluetooth there. And what that indicator panel is, it just tells you when things like the engine brake are on, or when the backup lights are on, things like that. It's just a warning indicator panel. Bad Drivers, the lower 48 asks, I have a question. Why did you choose the W900 over other trucks? I'm a W9 fan myself and want to hear some of your reasons for liking it. Also, I noticed you don't have windows on the sleeper doors. Is there a certain reason for not getting the windows? Also, I'm an aspiring truck driver who's looking to eventually buy my own truck and go owner-op. As someone who's purchased a few trucks already, I'm wondering if I should buy a new truck or a used one. Your opinions, your thoughts. Okay, that's like a couple of questions, so I'm going to break it down. The reason I chose the W9, it actually started when I was a kid, back in like first grade, kindergarten, that time in there. There was this trucking company up the street from me, from the school I went to, Gary Prince Trucking. I saw their trucks coming by all the time. They had these really cool Kenworths. You know, this is in the late 80s when it was the Aerodyne ones, and they were just really cool looking trucks, and they had these things all lit up, and they had their trailers all polished up and everything. And I was growing up, I was in a real bad situation. My mom is a really horribly abusive, crazy person, and so I was like constantly looking for ways to get out. I just wanted to get away. And when I saw those trucks going by and I'm sitting there in class, I just kind of knew that every day that those guys in those trucks, they were going to go thousands of miles away before they came back. And I always thought that was really cool. And I think that's when the seeds of wanting to be a trucker really started. And it's funny because I told myself that someday I was going to have a Kenworth with the Aerodyne one sleeper, and it was going to be painted orange. And that was like what I really wanted. I wanted that really nice, bright orange W900L. Never got it, surprisingly. I never got an orange W9. Then I also really wanted a black one really bad. Never had a black one. But that's where my love of the W9 started. Those guys had W9s, and they were just cool looking trucks. I wish I had some pictures of those to share. I don't have any pictures of those to share. That was like way before I even got into photography ever. I'd never even taken a picture of my life at that point, I don't think. And so that's how I started to get into the W9. The reason I don't have sleepers on here is I love my vent doors. And here's the thing, is running down the road, I crack the vents open, and what that does, that gives you positive airflow through the cab. I don't like using the windows up here just because they tend to leak, so I like to leave them shut and leave them sealed, because I find that when you leave the upper windows in here shut, the little tilt outs, that the gasket tends to stay in place, but when you start opening and closing those all the time, the gasket tends to start letting water come in the windows, and what will happen is the air whipping around will actually drive water up in and over those. So that's something that pretty much anyone that's driven a Kenworth can tell you about. It's sucky when that happens. And so I just tend to leave these windows closed. I love my vent doors because I can leave the vents open. And I don't like the windows because here's the thing about the window doors. It's nice to be able to look out them. I had them in my first truck. But oh my God, you get so hot inside of the sleeper because like if you're down in Phoenix, that thing is a dark tinted piece of glass. And even if you roll the piece of, you know, the little curtain down over it, what happens there is that heat just comes pouring through that glass and it just heats everything inside the truck up. There's no insulation in there. And most of the time that I had those on the truck, I had a piece of foam that I'd cut out and shoved in there just to insulate those windows, so they weren't doing me any good. I wasn't getting any ventilation. And so I would much rather have the vents in the side of the sleeper where I can have the flow through. Keeps the truck from stinking too when you do that, because you spend so much time in a space this small, you know, especially like when you have a dog, it'll wind up stinking. And so that's a really good point to have, as I crack those open, and that helps bring the smell of ass and dog out of the truck. When it comes to buying your own truck, here's the advice I'm going to give you. Worry more about the mechanical condition of the truck than the paint job. Paint won't get you home, and that's a mistake that I made a couple of times. The second truck I bought was this beautiful, beautiful W9. It is kind of this blood red paint. It was actually the first truck I called the Red Express. It was the second truck I owned. Had a C16 cat in it, and I thought I was just high on the hog, and I just had to have this truck because I was all enthralled with the C16. And I was all in love with the fact it had that big motor in there, and it had this, you know, fancy red paint job on it. I paid a lot of money for that truck when I bought it. I paid $45,000 or $48,000 for that truck when I bought it, and it had 900 and some odd thousand miles on it. That thing had been run pretty hard. Well, in being run pretty hard, that motor was at the point where it needed an overhaul, and I ran that truck for, I only had that truck for less than a year. I had a whole lot of problems with it, and then I found out, you know, I had electrical issues like crazy with it, and then I started to realize, you know, this thing's going to need a motor here pretty soon, and I wound up selling out of it, and that's when I got out of it then. And there were some other reasons attached to that. That truck broke down, and I missed my grandmother's funeral because the truck had broke down on me, left me stranded, so little things like that. So if you can afford it, if you're going to go for a new truck, if you can afford it, I would buy a glider. I would go just straight for a glider. I would put an older engine in it, you know, like a 6NZ, 2WS, great motors, 1LW, even 5EK. All those motors are great motors. Each of them has their own little quirks that you need to research and decide what it is you want to deal with. But those series of engines there, I have run the dog snot out of all of those. I've had a 1LW, I've had a 2WS, I've had a 5EK, and I've had a 6NZ. So I've had the whole spread of those motors, and they're all great motors. Those things run awesome. And so if I had like all the money in the world right now to build whatever truck that I wanted to build, I'd go build a W9 glider. I'd go put probably a 6NZ or a 2WS in it, and that's what I'd run. And I'd be perfectly happy to do so. Gary Clarkill asks, hey Renegade, once I go through CDL school, what flatbed company do you suggest I go through? I'm sure there are quite a few looking for your opinion. I found Melton, but not really sure. Gary, that's a hard one. I have not researched this sort of thing in years and years and years. That's just the way it is because, I mean, I've been in the industry now 13 years almost. So that, my whole learning phase there, that was a long, long time behind me. So I really don't know that I'd be the best guy to give you that advice. I know in the past I've turned people towards TMC just because I'm familiar with the company. I would not go to TMC as an owner-operator, but I think as a company driver you'd do okay over there. But the thing I always tell people is get your CDL yourself. Get it financed yourself, pay for it yourself. And the reason you want to do that is because when you go to a company, if you find out that you don't like where you're at, you don't owe them money if you leave. You can go somewhere else. You're free to pick up and leave. And that's something that it's going to really dictate how your trucking career starts, because if you go to a company where you are locked into having to pay them money for the job that you're working in, and you should never pay someone to go to work for them, period. And so if you have to pay them for to be allowed to go out and do your job, they have a certain stranglehold on you. They can tell you what to do because you have to do it or you owe them a lot of money, and the big companies know this and they exploit the hell out of it. So that's why get your CDL yourself. If you could find a place that has like a reimbursement program, hey, great, more power to you. Personally, I like to stick towards the smaller fleets. I've always liked being in a smaller fleet better. The company I'm with right now, we have 14 trucks. I'm one of 14. And I like that because it means that I'm not, you know, driver number XYZ calling in on the phone and having to explain what's going on. I can call the company owner on his cell phone at 3 o'clock in the morning if I have a problem and get shit done. And that's why I try to stay with the smaller companies. I mean, there's good and bad to either side of it. Smaller companies, they don't have the capital to operate on that the big companies do, so sometimes that's a little bit different. But ultimately, I like the smaller companies better. And I think that you will learn more at a smaller company because at a smaller company, you're going to be around experienced hands that have done it longer. So what I would do is instead of looking for one of these big mega fleets, I would try and find a small company locally that you can go with. Just, you know, take a look around and put your name out there a little bit, because that's how I started. The outfit that I mentioned earlier, Gary Prince Trucking, that's where I learned how to drive. I got out of the Navy. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. My dad said, hey, why don't you go think about getting a CDL? I said, hey, I should do that. And so I went and talked to Gary, and next thing you know, I'm hanging out with him every day, and he's teaching me about trucks and everything. And the most important instruction I got from him really wasn't the time behind the wheel. I figured that stuff out pretty fast. It was just all the knowledge that he handed down to me. So when you're figuring out where it is you're going to get your training from, that knowledge that's getting passed down to you is very, very important. So I wouldn't go anywhere where it's a trainer that's only been driving for 6 months or whatever, because a lot of the big fleets you're going to find that the guys that are training out there minimum 6 months to be a trainer. Do you think someone that's only been in the business 6 months more than you is qualified to, you know, train you, especially when you're going to spend like $6,500, $7,000 for that training? I really don't think it's worth that. So if you could find someone locally to teach you, it's a little bit harder to do it that way. I know it's easy just to pick up the phone, call one of the big fleets and go to work for them. They make it that way for a reason, because they take advantage of people. That's generally how that works. But if you could go to a smaller company, get your CDL there, get things worked out there, that's how I did it. That's how I would recommend you do it if you can. I think you'll learn a lot more that way, and you'll get a much better education. If you can find the old hands, especially like if you have a small mom and pop truck stop out there in your hometown, a lot of retired truck drivers still go to the truck stop to eat. So go out there and find those guys that maybe they're not driving all the time anymore. Maybe they only drive every other week, because like when Gary was teaching me how to drive, that's what he was doing, is he'd make a run and then he'd stay home for a while. He'd make a run, stay home. And so he was there free to train me. And so if you can find one of those guys like that, it'll be the absolute best situation you can find yourself in. I absolutely guarantee that, because a lot of the old timers out here, man, they really know their stuff. and they will teach you things that the driving school will never teach you. There's just like so many things flooding to the front of my mind. I don't have time to throw it in this video here, but I really encourage you to go out, find that smaller fleet. You'll be glad you did. DDrum705 asks, here's one for your next Q&A. I saw a vid where a driver refused to help a DOT do an inspection. Are we inclined by law to assist the officer in inspecting the vehicle? Thanks. Here's the thing with that. DOT cannot compel you to perform labor. They cannot say you will do this, you will perform this labor. They cannot force you to do that. But if you do that, if you do refuse to help them, it's kind of kicking the hornet's nest. And I don't like to tackle things that way because you are just asking for them to come after you. Instead, you want to make things easier on yourself. And so what I do when I go into a scale house, I don't walk in with a chip on my shoulder. I walk in very in charge of what I'm doing. I have all my stuff together. I have my permits. I know that I'm good to go. And when I walk in there, I've also got a video camera in my pocket. So if they're going to start to act a fool, I can whip that thing out, start recording. And you'll be amazed at how that changes their attitudes. But the thing that I really want to hammer on in this is when I walk into a scale house, I'm prepared. I know my truck's going to pass inspection because I check my truck over. I make sure that my junk's good to go here. And that way, when I roll in there with confidence. And when I roll through their front door with confidence of, you're not going to find anything on me, I'm good to go, I'm here doing my job, I'm a professional, they're not going to look at me because they're going to take, they're human beings, man. They're going to take the path of least resistance. And unless you make them mad, if you make them mad, they're going to want to hurt you. That's human nature. When you make someone mad, they're going to want to act back against you. And so doing that with a DOT cop saying, oh, I'm not going to help you, all it's going to do is it's going to make them look extra hard at your truck, and you're probably going to get placed out of service. That's kind of how those things tend to happen, and it just really depends on who the inspector is, everything else. But I'm just saying, man, don't kick the hornet's nest. They can't compel you to do it, but I don't see any reason not to do it because it is part of the deal. And to be bluntly honest, I know that a lot of people out here are all upset about trucks getting inspected and everything, but we do need the trucks to get inspected, because if trucks didn't get inspected, you'd have guys running down the road with no brakes in the drums hoping that they can stop. I mean, that's just the way it is in this business, and we're seeing a lot of that right now. You got a lot of these guys that are out going around the scales because their trucks won't pass an inspection ever, and these are the guys that are moving all this freight super cheap out here right now, so it's a real problem. So I don't get mad at the DOT for inspecting trucks because I know my truck's good to go. I did my job, I take care of my truck, and if they find something, it's my job to get it fixed. I mean, that's how I look at it. I don't have an adversarial relationship there because I take good care of my equipment. The guys you find, and there's always those voices around, and it's usually the guys that have the big hissy fits about that type of stuff, are the guys that don't keep their trucks up. And it's you need to keep that in consideration, you know, when you're hearing those types of things. What's the source? X-Trucker87 asks, how much do you plan on selling red for? Because I'll buy. And Dreamcatcher 2004 asked, how much do you want for red? Probably about 15 grand, be going on the market in another couple of weeks here. Stephen Brinkley asks, Nick, what was your biggest load so far in your life? It was definitely that Komatsu D155AX that I hauled. That thing was freaking huge. It was 102,000 pounds. Luke Augustus asks, just a question, how does the neck piece stay on the trailer when you detach the trailer? Is there a thing that it hooks onto? Luke, what happens is when the trailer comes back together, there's an air-operated pin that drops down through the neck, and that goes into the front of the trailer. And you can see in this video clip here how when I back in, that thing drops down. That's the pin that holds it all together. And when that pin's down, that neck cannot come apart. And that collar on the neck there on the bottom you see backing up, that collar, it slides into a groove there, and that's what keeps the neck from falling forward when you disconnect the truck from the trailer.